We're now broadcasting. I'll let people filter in here.
Thanks, Brittany. I knew it was 3 o'clock. I just didn't realize that people wouldn't filter in themselves.
We're just have to press the button. All right, so we are both recording and we are live. So we'll let the numbers bump up here and then I'll get us going.
How many people are we expecting? It's the weird thing about the Zoom talks. I have no idea. I'm gonna look at Rob's face the whole time, but I have no idea.
We have we've had 2 seminars, and I think one we were at about 90 something and one we were at 70 somethings. So it's much larger than actually if we had to cram us all into it.
No, totally. I gave one recently in Ecuador and I looked down at the end and we were at 250 and I was like, oh.
Wow.
Because I can't see anybody. I don't know.
That's great.
Yeah, that is great.
Yeah, all right. I guess they're still coming in. Give it another minute. All right, that looks pretty stable. Okay, thanks everybody for joining our department seminar for the Department of Natural History today. Just as a reminder, before we start the introduction for our speaker, the way that we'll do questions is either using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen that you can press on and then type in a question at the end of the talk, or you can raise your hand and you should see a little raise hand function. And if you raise your hand, then we can call on you and unmute your microphone so that you can ask a question just using your audio. So with that, I will turn it over to Rob.
Thanks, Dave. Can everyone can hear me just fine? Hopefully, see a thumbs up. Great. So I had the pleasure today of introducing Ben Weinstein. Ben is a postdoctoral fellow here at UF working with Ethan White in WEC, who many of you might know. Ben got his PhD in 2016 at Stony Brook. Is that right, Ben? Thumbs up. Nice. And I learned of Ben's work many years ago when Ben was doing experimental work actually on tropical hummingbirds. I thought it was great work at the time and still really excellent stuff. But around the same time, I actually started reading and maybe even occasionally reviewing Ben's work on computer vision, including what I think is pretty much already a seminal paper entitled Computer Vision for Animal Ecology back in 2018, Ben, is that right? And that's also the title of the work he's presenting here today. So Ben's work is incredibly broad phylogenetically, and in terms of the different facets of biodiversity that Ben considers. I mean, Ben, you've worked on like plants, birds, mammals. I can't believe you haven't focused on insects, but maybe you have and I just don't know it yet. And also on facets, just like thinking about interactions, kind of phylogenetic diversity. So all these different pieces, trait diversity, a lot of your work is trait-based. It's just really broad and really exciting. But in the last couple of years, what Ben has really, I think, done above and beyond sort of thinking about the sort of biodiversity and scales of biodiversity is really thinking about how to scale up, how we can use remote sensing to simultaneously monitor things like millions of trees. And especially given burgeoning interest here in the museum and across the campus in artificial intelligence, I think his seminar couldn't be better timed for us to see what a visionary working in this area is really doing. However, I should mention before I let Ben start here that this seminar isn't very well timed for him. So he's had a huge challenge kind of just dealing with the contingencies in the West around the really horrific situation there with fires, and air quality indices are so off the charts they can't even report it properly. So I really want to especially thank him for the seminar given the situation there. So having said all that, and hoping that Ben's voice does hold out for the full time of the seminar, let me introduce and welcome Ben Weinstein. Ben, take it away.
Thank you, Rob. That's a very kind introduction. So as Rob said, I'm in Portland, Oregon right now, and the air quality is pretty amazing. And so my voice will crack and pop in and out as I go. I may have to stop for water, but we're just going to give it a try. So when I got invited to give this talk, Rob asked me to go big and broad, but also detailed and interesting. So I've kind of covered a real wide sort of section of stuff here. And I'm hopeful that there'll be lots of time for questions. And so I have little tidbits of pieces that I could talk about more. And so if there are things of interest, let's get into it in the Q&A because we kind of cover a lot of ground. So a computer vision for ecology. So as Rob said, I've been working in a really broad array of different taxa and questions over the last few years. And so I wanted to start with the big question, if Rob asked me to go big, which is why is ecology so hard, right? Like what is it about ecology which makes it difficult and might lead us to want to use other sets of tools? The first is that ecological processes are highly variable over time and space. I don't think anyone needs to be convinced of that. We have challenges with detection bias and an uneven observer quality. And so we can only go out and see so much. And when we go out, we're actually changing the environment that we observe. And this is a huge underlying sort of unescapable problem. We have important rare effects like fire, for example, that are combined with very long-term dynamics for population demography, making that sampling over short periods of time, like you could do for one PhD, really difficult to assess the kind of interesting ecological effects that we want. And finally, in terms of conservation, there are weak economic incentives for conservation. And so if someone had to press me, these are sort of 4 reasons that ecology is really hard. And what I hope to show you today is that artificial intelligence can help address some of these challenges. We're not going to solve any of these things, but because they're the central tenets of ecology. But I hope to show you that computer vision can help lessen the burden of some of these challenges. So what is computer vision? Computer vision, this is my standard cat dog photo. Computer vision is a type of artificial intelligence focused on creating semantic information from sensor data. And so what that literally means is we might have a set of tasks, and those tasks might have labels, or those tasks might have objects of interest. And we want to associate labels and objects of interest with our sensor data. Here, this is RGB data. And so we have a cat, and we might call this whole image a cat. And so that's a classification. We might localize within the image a place where there is a cat, and that's localization. We might detect multiple objects in an image, and we might call that object detection, and call this a cat, a dog, a duck. And then you might involve finer detail segmentations on a per pixel basis. And computer vision might be applied to RGB imagery, 3-dimensional point clouds, hyperspectral imagery. But basically, we're trying to create semantic structures that describe pieces of data. The growth of computer vision in the last decade or so has really been driven by deep learning neural networks. And so a lot of the progress that's been made here is in industry, especially in self-driving cars, in search, in all sorts of applications of neural networks. And it's been around for a long time, since the 70s, but advances in computing power, Hypergator here at Florida has been hugely useful in our use of GPUs. So advances of computing power, as well as algorithmic advances, has allowed us to directly associate labels and of interest with particular imagery. Neural networks are hierarchical. They describe properties of pixels, and then properties of those properties of pixels, and then properties of those properties of pixels, all the way up to sort of object motifs of things we're interested in, like cat or dog. So why do we need artificial intelligence for ecology? What is it at the broadest level that might make this attractive. As Rob said, I started out in hummingbird biology. I've worked on whales. I've worked on all sorts of stuff. And I've been drawn to this area of research because I think there's something transformative here that really can be beyond what an average researcher can do. So what is it that we can do to make this available to everyone? We hope that artificial intelligence will increase sampling intensity and reduce observer bias. Simply put, we can get more data. I had a reviewer once tell me that my paper was essentially a description of how data good. And that in some ways is really all that I'm trying to offer you. I'm just offering you more data. And just think of all the things you can do with more data. And that is essentially the promise of artificial intelligence. We can capture domain expertise for a wide audience. Think of the thousands of hours that you've spent developing expertise to identify your species of interest, whether they're insects or plants or birds, right? That knowledge lives inside of you and is so hard to get to other people because you have to physically be there, or they send you a picture of it and you look at it, right? We have so much incorporated domain knowledge, but we have a hard time creating a way of expressing it to other people. We can reduce the cost of data collection by allowing artificial intelligence to be a highly efficient form of data collection. And I also will sort of talk at the end here about increasing quantitative rigor by measuring prediction uncertainty. And so there's a lot of interest in forecasting in ecology, and this has been a growing sort of burgeoning field in the last couple of years. And I hope to show you that artificial intelligence can help us move towards a more predictive ecology, or at least assess where we're good at making predictions. So let's sort of start at the broadest level. What is possible? What's out there that's been happening? Because there's a lot of different pieces, and we're just now starting to coalesce into a community. Big thanks to Microsoft Artificial Intelligence for Earth group. That's really been helpful in creating that community. And some of the work that they've been doing is on the mega detector. This is for camera traps. The idea is that if you've ever done a camera trap study, you'll know that 99% of frames are empty. And so trying to review all of them is a tremendous amount of work. And some people will say, well, we'll have undergraduates do it. But in truth, they're not very good, and you can't scale to the kinds of scales we need. There was a recent data set collected on tigers in India that I think was 100 million photos. And no amount of undergrads are ever going to attack that kind of data set. And so Siyu Yang, who's a wonderful collaborator of mine at Microsoft, has been working on the mega detector. It's available for species classification and detection. They've also been working on Lila.science, which is a benchmarking and data collection repository. And so big credit to Microsoft there. My own work started a couple years ago with Deep Meerkat. The idea is that if you have a set of frames for a video and they're all empty and you're waiting for your object of interest, for example, a butterfly to visit a flower, we can run a set of software to look through those videos and say, okay, at minute 12, something's happening that you should see. That's really important. And so Deep Meerkat was originally published in there was Motion Meerkat first. It was the original version, 2016. And it just became obvious to me that people really needed these tools. I was just a grad student. I didn't know what I was doing. It was my first Python program that I wrote. And this is a download map of the first, I think it was 6 months of Motion Meerkat being out there. And so we're at still downloads every week. I mean, thousands of downloads. And the thing's not even that good, to be perfectly honest, right? It needs improvement, and we just got money, in fact, to improve it. But it just showed that the desire for computer vision solutions was out there. My own PhD involved taking time-lapse cameras and putting them at flowers and waiting for hummingbirds to visit. And hummingbirds are too fast for trail cameras. And so instead, cameras would take a photo every second to just get a blanket set of images. So it was 48,000 photos a day. We were collecting terabytes of data a month. And so I designed a neural network model to watch the videos and say, okay, at minute 17, we think there's a hummingbird. And this same kind of technology has been useful for sharks. It's been useful for a lot of things. And so while it's pretty naive, people have been using it and people have been liking it. Cornell has been doing great work on bird identification, both from handheld imagery. They have a Merlin bird app that I highly recommend, which is pretty cool. It's out now. As well as I talked to Holger Klink at Cornell looking at BirdNet, which is a sound identification tool. And if you haven't seen BirdNet, I'll show a little demo. It's pretty cool. And this is just showing like what is possible, what is out there that's happening right now. So hopefully you can hear that. Here is a recording, and as it's recording, it is predicting live what those birds they're hearing. And that is, in fact, definitely a blue jay. And I can hear a titmouse in the background. And so this is what I'm talking about, democratizing this research and democratizing your domain expertise. You know, I've spent my entire life developing knowledge about birds and being a birder, and trying to explain to someone like what it is, like why is a short-billed dowitcher different than a long-billed dowitcher? It's very difficult to explain that, but maybe my knowledge can be encapsulated in a neural network by annotating sets of images or videos. And then those network weights control and contain my knowledge and can be very easily sent to another person. And so think about it not as replacing people, but multiplying your knowledge to other people. So what are sort of the essential components of these different solutions, right? I've shown you a couple cool things. What makes up a sort of computer vision solution and tool? Well, the first is data. That shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, right? We need data collected from the field. We need to annotate that data in some way to describe the labels of interest. We're going to develop some kind of model that describes how the annotations are related to the data. We're going to evaluate that model by holding some data back and having critical splits of our data, say this is train, this is test. It's really important to make sure that we're really rigorous with our train test splits. We're going to predict some new set of data given our model, and hopefully we're going to make it reproducible so that other people can use it. And so this is what I sort of see as the gold standard of the workflow that we're trying to get to as a community, and understanding where we are as a community about the strengths and weaknesses right now. And so I've given you sort of a high level idea about how these all pieces are out there, but it was kind of ethereal. So let me talk about one of the projects I'm working on. And I hope you'll see sort of the data annotation, model, evaluation, prediction criteria, and how that kind of comes through as one set of work. So for the last several years, I've been at UF working with Ethan White. We have an NSF project on neon trees. The goal is both modest and ridiculous. We are attempting to predict the location of all the trees and all the neon sites. So all we want to do is just draw boxes around every single tree in all the neon sites. So it's very easy to describe, very hard to do, but it's quite a fun project, and I've been really enjoying working on it. So NEON, for those who don't know, is the National Ecological Observation Network. NEON has like 42 sites with airborne data all across the United States. They collect it through fixed-wing aircraft that are flown at least once a year. Excuse me, at least once every other year. They try to get every year for RGB data, for LiDAR data, for hyperspectral data. And they also pair that with ground surveys. So NEON is probably the largest ecological data collector right now in terms of airborne data that's freely available. You can go to the data portal right now and download any of the data you see. And it's a super exciting time for being in ecology. And so what we want to do is take one of these giant tiles. This is for the San Joaquin Valley in California. Take one of the 1 square kilometer tiles. We're going to divide each of those tiles into 40-meter crops. And all I need to do is predict every tree in all of those crops for every site. That's all we need to do. So what we're going to try to do is use different pieces of data to help get us to that really lofty, really huge goal. It should be said, and I think perhaps obvious to most people, that tree detection is really hard, right? Like, it's very daunting to think about. And when I first started this project, we were like, this is completely impossible. We're going to get nowhere on this, right? But if you break down the different pieces of why it's hard, we can start attacking it in ways that gets us somewhere. I don't want to oversell what we've done because there's a lot of work to do. And I really know that sort of deep in my core, how much work that we have left to do. But we've really tried to identify the different parts of it and try to come up with strategies for each. So first is a lack of training data, right? Like, how are you going to get all those boxes and describe to the computer what a tree should look like? Someone has to click on them, or someone has to go to the field and measure them. That's the first time. Sorry, my voice coughed for a sec. And so you have to have lots of boxes, right? Deep learning works because we have lots of data. So we have some challenges there. We have extreme class variability. We're going to start talking right now about one class, which is tree, and that's going to describe all the trees in the United States. And so we have this extraordinary presentation variability about our class. And then challenges of scale variation. Big trees are different than small trees, and they might look different at different scales and different structures. So it should be said tree detection is hard. But it's not new. People have been trying to work on tree detection for the last 2 decades. There are, without exaggeration, 100 papers. Sometimes papers are coming out multiple times a week. I get requests for reviews on tree detection. So this is sort of the canonical problem in airborne remote sensing of forests, right? You want to associate attributes with individual trees. And so how can we harness previous work? We don't want to just throw out what we've done before and say we've got something new. I think that's very naive. What we want to do is say, let's take what we've done before as a field and try to apply it to some of these new and novel deep learning tools. So what can we do? We can take previous work, which normally kind of looks like this. This is a sort of a paper from Williams et al. Paper recently from the LiDAR. And the logic is pretty simple. It's like if you have a bunch of 3D point clouds, you like take the tallest point. If the next point is within some distance, call it the same tree. If the angle is within some distance, call it a tree. And then when it breaks that rule, call it a new tree. And the algorithm is unsupervised and it walks through all the data and comes up with predictions of trees. We would call this in the machine learning literature sort of handcrafted features. They're human designed rules. And what we've learned over the last 2 decades is that handcrafted features are brittle. They break easily. You can make them really, really, really good, but when you tweak anything at all, the whole thing falls down. And so what we want to do is use the strength of handcrafted features, but then try to get the kind of scales of data we need for deep learning. And so what we want to do is take some of those unsupervised algorithms. We have a tremendous amount of unlabeled data, right? Neon is flying at terabytes, close to petabytes of remote sensing data year after year, collecting all this data. And we want to create what we call weak labels. The idea here is that the unsupervised algorithms aren't perfect. They're not very good in general. If they were, why would we be working on this? So we take something that works okay, we're going to do it a lot of times, and we're going to try to measure sort of what our error is. Because we have to overcome lack of data somehow. No amount of people, this is my toddler out in the backyard measuring trees, no amount of people are ever going to measure trees by hand to get the kind of scales we want. And I want to give a couple examples about why this is doable at all and why it's worth doing, right? Wildfires just hit Oregon. A very reasonable question would be, how many trees died? How much carbon was released to the atmosphere? What was the average size of tree that died? Right? We have no way to address those questions. And if you happen to have made a 40-meter hand plot at that exact location, you would still only have a tiny fraction of the forest. So in some ways, remote sensing is the only way forward for some of these tools. And so while we may not be perfect, we're trying to attack questions that honestly you can't get at any other way. So let's sort of, what are the workflow we've done with this weak label idea? I'll try to walk through this kind of slowly to describe what are the different pieces of the puzzle. So we start with this airborne LiDAR data, this 3-dimensional point clouds. It's literally lasers shooting down and getting the returns and creating 3-dimensional structure. We're going to take that LiDAR data, we're going to create a canopy height model, so literally just the highest return in that model. And we're going to use one of those unsupervised algorithms. We use Carlos Silva's algorithm from 2016. It's available in the LiDAR package. It's called Silva 2016. And so you extract pre-tree locations. So that algorithm is going to walk through all the LiDAR data and make a bunch of predictions where trees are. Most of those predictions aren't going to be that great, but the whole point is we're going to do this side of the equation a lot. Tens of thousands of times, hundreds of thousands of times, millions of times, tens of millions of times, and try to get a lot of weak label data. And what are we going to do with that data? We're going to stick it into a neural network, and it's going to learn RGB representations of that LiDAR data. So we're going from, this is the LiDAR, and it's producing tree predictions. We're going to take each of those tree predictions, drape them on the RGB, crop those RGB predictions out, and train a deep learning neural network on those RGB predictions. So we're phase transferring, if you will, from LiDAR to RGB, from handcrafted features to deep learning features. And then at the end, what we're going to do is add in hand annotated boxes, things I've literally clicked on. I've clicked on over 10,000 tree boxes by hand, and retrain the neural network and say, okay, you learned some things that were good from this weak labeled data. Now have high quality data and relearn what you need. And the sort of metaphor I've been using for this is that you don't waste Shakespeare on a toddler, right? We don't hand small children Hamlet and say, learn English. We teach them sentences and words and structures. And over time, they read Little Blue Truck and they make sense of it. And then they build knowledge. And so while all of those things might not be Shakespeare, they're moving towards something. And at the end, you take your high quality data and say, this is the best. And so what I try to do is say, don't waste all of your Shakespeare on your crappy model. Make sure that you spend time to train it to learn things that are important. Because what I want to show you is that that individual model, that unsupervised model, knows something about trees, and it's going to teach our model to learn from it. And then we're going to take high quality data and fix the mistakes. So this was just a wild idea. It's called weak supervision that I had a couple years ago. And we had no idea if this was going to work, right? This was completely, we were like, okay, let's see what happens. So this is the performance of the unsupervised algorithm for that San Joaquin site. And you can see it doesn't do a very good job, right? It gets like 20% of trees, and 20% of those predictions are actually trees. And what it actually looks like, if you look at a picture, is these are predicted crowns from the LiDAR data. This is again draped on the RGB. And so this is actually one tree. It's been split into 4. That's a boulder, right? It doesn't have any spectral information because it's the LiDAR, so it doesn't know. And you could tune these algorithms to be a little better or a little worse. But in truth, at the scale we're talking about, there is no global solution. So you can turn one knob and make it bigger and change those rules a little bit. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. What you need is a bigger solution. And so we took the LiDAR and trained the neural network and let's see what happens. And we were surprised, genuinely. This is the self-supervised performance. And so we took an algorithm that performed here. We transferred from LiDAR to RGB, and we trained a neural network. And so now we're going from handcrafted to deep features, and we get a better model. And that's exciting. And we're like, okay, what happens if we add in the hand-annotated data? And when you add in the hand-annotated data, it gets even better. And this was even exciting because we, again, didn't know if this was going to work at all. Because this line, I think for this original paper, this thing is made up of like 700,000 weak labels. And this thing's made up of 3,000 hand annotations. And so we didn't know if there was gonna be enough sort of momentum to change out of that local minima. But it did. And we were like, okay, we're on to something. Let's follow it. And you can sort of see what happens here is that this is the unsupervised algorithm at first. It produces kind of over segmentations. You can see that in the pre-training model, and you can see the sort of ghost, if you will, of that weak supervision. And then after we hand annotate and retrain the model, you can see much better scores, as well as the confidence in each of those boxes increases. So you're like, okay, awesome, we're on to something. Let's attack it and let's keep going. And so what I did for the second paper, this was a paper came out last year, was, okay, that's a pretty easy site, right? I showed you a California oak forest, and some of you were like, well, my forest is much harder. And it definitely is, don't get me wrong. So what we wanted to do was say, okay, what if we took multiple types of forests? Let's take an alpine forest, a deciduous forest, an oak woodland forest. And the best possible situation is that we could get one model for all of them. Because it'd be really annoying to have a deep learning model for every possible type of forest. Can you imagine trying to keep track of all of them and figure out when one was better or not? So we had to figure out how to combine all the models together. So one reasonable question is if you pre-trained on one geography and predicted another, how would it perform? And so what I want to draw you to is this figure is the mean average precision. And what is the actual value is not as important as what I want to show you here. So this diagonal here would be if we trained on an eastern deciduous forest, and then we predicted an eastern deciduous forest. So this is itself the same kind of forest type. So different data, the data have been split, but the different forest type. This would be trained on oak woodland and predicted alpine. That works terribly. But what I want you to compare it to, this diagonal to right here. This is the all model. If we dumped all the data into a giant pool, what happens? And what's really cool, and really sort of another way, okay, we're onto something, is that notice the values here actually increase. So dumping all of the data and predicting the eastern deciduous forest is better than just training on eastern deciduous forest and predicting other eastern deciduous forest. And what that means is that the model's starting to learn some essential treeness. It's learning something about trees from alpine and oak woodland forests that it's also applying to eastern deciduous forests. And so the route forward is just one giant pool of data, and you let the model decide. And that's really awesome because it means that we don't have to keep track of anything. We can just have a giant sort of vat of data. and we can just keep dumping data in. And that's the best case scenario. I wanted to show what this ended up looking like. So this is the mixed pine forest. This is ground truth that's labeled by hand. I want to draw your eye to this boulder here, this little arrow. And you'll see that in the mixed pine itself, it made a mistake and predicted this boulder. And here under the universal model, it correctly figures out that that boulder is not right. And so this was, again, a hint that we were onto something. So we wanted to make this available because we were like, wow, a lot of people are going to want this. We don't know how well it's going to work. We need help. We need a lot of people to look at this as fast as possible. So I developed a Python package that was published. I should say it's accepted, but not published, a methods in ecology evolution. It's called Deep Forest. And what we have is an evaluation routine. Excuse me. We have an evaluation routine that looks at out of sample data for a ton of neon sites. So each of these is data that the model's never seen before. And the 4-letter code is the neon site. Some of you might be familiar with it, but this one's the state. So this is Tea Kettle Canyon, California. This is Harvard Forest, Massachusetts. In green are predicted trees. In black are ground truth hand annotations. And so while it's not perfect, again, don't want to oversell this at all. We have a lot of work to do. While it's not perfect, it's creating reasonable predictions that we think we can do ecology on. And so Deep Forest is out there. It's pip install Deep Forest, Kana install Deep Forest, go for it. Submit an issue. We know there's going to be places it's not going to work. We want your help to make it better. And I think this is, again, is that cycle of reproducibility for where we are in computer vision. But what about people who can't use Python? What about people who just want the data? How can we make it available to them at that scale? So we took on the challenge, and we want to thank, again, the folks at HyperGator for letting us use a lot of GPUs and a lot of energy. We applied Deep Forest to pretty much every tile that Neon has. It's something like 300 terabytes, maybe it's less than that, and 16 GPUs running for a long time. And we predicted all of the trees at all the Neon sites. And we are releasing that. It's currently in review at eLife, but the data is up on Zenodo right now. And in fact, if you want to see what this looks like, you have a 1 square kilometer tile, and each of them, you can zoom in and see all the data. And you can go to this website, and I'm pretty sure I can do this without having too much problems here. Someone yell at me, Rob, yell at me if no one can see it, if anything's wrong. But I will show what this looks like. Can you unmute and say you can see this? So like,
I can see it.
Awesome.
Ben, you're all set, man. You're doing great.
Okay, so up here in the corner, you can go to visualize.idtrees.org and you can click on your favorite Neon site. Let's go to Ordway because everyone's in Florida. And you can zoom in. And should you want to see, there are 4.145 million trees at Ordway, or so we think. And if you would like to see what they are all predicted, you can zoom in. It takes a second to render, and you can roll through. And in some ways, I ask people not to obsess a little bit much about individual trees. You will find errors here. You will definitely find errors. But remember, you're looking at 4.145 million trees. And so one of the things that we want to suggest is that as we move towards a greater vision of ecology at scale, we need to think about propagating uncertainty rather than sort of falsely protecting this idea that everything's perfect. And I think we need to have a little bit of physics envy and think about astronomy. Astronomers know that they can't see all the stars correctly. Some stars are just too far away. And so the whole field is driven by imaging and uncertainty in imaging. And I hope that ecology can start moving in that same direction, because no one would claim that we have mapped all of the stars. We just do our best with the imaging we have. And I hope that we can start moving in that same direction in a computer vision for ecology. Okay, so you can go look at millions and millions of trees. I won't belabor it should you want to. And I'm gonna turn the slide back on. There we go. And so that's what we've learned so far from Neon. We've learned that semi-supervised data can help us alleviate a lack of trained data. This seems to work, whether it's a one-off, we don't know. Cross-geography learning is hard, and choosing challenging test data is really critical. And then open source development will help sort of democratize this and bring other viewpoints in. Because we don't want to pretend like this is perfect. We want feedback. We're looking for feedback. So what are the next steps? We're going to do multi-temporal learning, right? Trees in one year should look kind of like trees in the next. And right now it's predicting 2018 and 2019 completely separately, but there needs to be some multi-temporal learning. Thanks to Sarah Beery, there's some impetus for this in camera traps, and it's the same kind of tools. Sarah's been working on using bounding boxes from one camera trap image to inform the location of bounding boxes in others, because gazelles, for example, will use the same path in an image. And so we know that images have this implicit connection. And so I think there's a really exciting way forward on multi-temporal, multi-sensor learning using weak attention networks. And I'm happy to talk about that more if people are interested in weak attention. We're also working on species prediction. It's super hard. We're working on it. My lab mate, Sergio Marconi, shown here, not at all looking evil with his tiny dog, has been working on species prediction for the neon sites. And at 85 species across the neon sites, we're about 75% accurate, which I think is really reasonable because we're getting the dominant species really well. The rare species are hard. So if you have questions about species prediction, we're working on it right now. We welcome collaborators, and I'm happy to take questions on that as well. Okay, so that was sort of case study number one. I'm going to do a tiny little thing on case study number two, which is much shorter, but I want to show you what I'm sort of doing on the other side of the Ecology Lab with Morgan Ernest, and it's really applicable to this audience, so I wanted to make sure it was in here. So as many of you know, there's been a huge money put forward for Everglades restoration, and part of that, the state and Fish and Wildlife have mandated certain measures of ecological restoration. One of them is wading bird recovery and nest success. And so the change in water flow in the Everglades should lead to improved nest success, or so we think. And so we want to measure that over time. And so Morgan's lab is working with Fish and Wildlife. We're doing a lot of drone surveys in the Everglades to look at wading bird colonies. And the hope here is that we can measure with repeated drone surveys nest success over long periods of time. And so this is a really topical moment and something we just started, so it's not going to be perfect by any means, but it's an ongoing project that's really exciting. And one of the things that allows us to do and allows me to talk about briefly is the idea that transfer learning in computer vision is going to be super important. And what I mean by that is that we can start with a model, the deep forest model about trees. And as I told you, neural networks are hierarchical. They learn things about pixels, and those pixels learn things about pixels and pixels and pixels. And it goes up sort of the chain. And so we don't need to start from nothing for our bird detection model. We already have a model that predicts trees pretty well. And trees and birds both have shapes. They are airborne. We think there's some reason to believe that that model will help us start from a greater position. And so we can do what's called transfer learning, take the weights of the model and use bird detections to then retrain the model to learn about birds instead of trees. And so what that ends up looking like, I won't go through the details here, is these are hand annotations versus predictions, hand annotations in black. Now that I've done this, you can see that the black is very dark and you can't tell at all, but you'll see the birds. Red is predicted, and these are white ibis and snowy egret colonies in the Everglades. And we're at about 89% precision, 47%, 89% recall, and it's 47%, 89% recall, 74% precision, excuse me. And so we're doing really well. This is our first summer. And what we hope to do is count wading birds in these colonies, 5,000 strong, 6,000 strong, and do this every week to start looking at nest histories. What I mean by that, move this guy a little bit here. What I mean by that is if you go back week after week and you have a bird sitting in the same location, that's a really good evidence that there's a nest there. And so using the spatial position of the bird combined with the deep learning bird prediction, we do what we're calling the bird model. There's a bird there in 1 week, a bird there in another week, and a bird there in the third week, calling that a nest. So if there's more than 3 weeks, I think it's 3 or 4 weeks of birds in the same location overlapping in 8 weeks of surveys, we're calling it a nest. And from that, we can start estimating nest histories. And so we have 3 types of data. We have present, this blue circle was the model correctly predicting the bird. We have misclassified, the model missed that bird. Present again, misclassified, present, and then absent. The bird is not there, and the model says it's not there. And now some of you are already noticing this is exactly like we do when we go to the field. We have observer bias, we have detection models, and we can start estimating, and mixture models, the traditional tools of population dynamics. And this is exciting because it's not just computer vision is this weird form of artificial intelligence and nothing to do with ecology. This is ecology. It's the same as we've always done, just at bigger scales. And so we can describe a model that describes bird presence and absence, and that is the nest history, in the same way you might do in a mark recapture model. So each of these vertical columns is a capture event, right? It's a drone survey. The horizontal columns is one nest. We're calling 3 detections a nest. And in black is detection, and in gray is non-detection. And this is exactly like those tools that everyone here is familiar with, where we want to use N mixture models or occupancy models to try to estimate the things we're interested in. And so we haven't sort of run all this analysis yet. We're still working on it. This is where we're going. Check back in a year if you want to know what's going on. But we can say the observed presence or absence of a nest is conditional on the previous week state, given our ability to detect nests. And so with that model, we can start estimating things like how many nests there are, what's the phenology of nesting, and even more importantly, as the Army Corps of Engineers changes the water levels of the Everglades, we can apply specific biotic coefficients to our models, just like everyone else does, but we'll do it at scale. So we have currently, like one of our sites has 6,000 nests, the other 5,000 nests, huge numbers. And so we can start to look at these things and assess uncertainty at sort of unprecedented scale. And that's what's really exciting. And so those are sort of the 2 examples I have. I want to get to sort of the Q&A question, so I'll tell you a little bit about where we're going as a field and a community. Someone chime in if I run over time. When I changed from the web viewer to back here, I lost my time clock. So I actually no longer know how long I've been talking.
Ben, you're fine on time.
Awesome. I lost the little thing. Now I'm talking for 7 minutes. And so where are we going, right? What is it that we hope to do as a community? Not just the Ecology Lab, not just my own work, but like what is it that would get us where we need to be? First, we need shareable models with common architecture. There's a lot of obsession in the machine learning literature about like the latest model and the latest thing. In truth, what we really need is some set of standards that get us to a place where, like, if you have a shark model, why should every shark researcher start from nothing, right? We want to be able to pull a model off the shelf. And I think it's a place where museums might play a really important role as sort of guardians of digital data. And this is the most latest, the most latest model zoo that performs reasonably well that you can start from. We need standardized data sets with easy to access metadata. Again, it can't be overstated. If you don't have the data in the right format, this is the #1 problem I face. People come to me wanting problems solved, but the data is an Excel sheet spread out over multiple computers. Data management has become more important than ever. We hope to move towards web applications for broadening access so that people can integrate with the data. No one believes me about the trees until I show them. No one believes any of this stuff until you show them. And so shiny apps, other types of web applications are going to be really important for people both submitting data as well as convincing the community that something's there. And so we need front-end developers. We need front-end developers who are going to stick around and help us be able to use those tools to sort of make this more official. And then we need quantitative evaluation, sort of rigorous science. We need to incorporate our existing statistical toolkit to these algorithms and stop treating them like something separate. It's just ecology in a different way. I think it's important to say what is not the goal. What is it we want to avoid, right? In the general, less so in science, but in the general culture, there is this sense of artificial intelligence that's sort of coming for us, right? That it's going to take our jobs or something, right? And this is entirely the wrong way of thinking about it. I think about human-computer collaboration, not competition, because there's nothing to do with what a human can do, right? Imagine trying to predict all of the trees at the neon site. What would it matter what human-level performance is? I constantly get asked, like, oh, is our algorithm as good as a person in the field? Like, no, of course not. But like, you couldn't see all the trees anyway. And so I think it's really important to stop thinking about this in a defensive way and thinking more about how do we use this tool, just like any other tool, to motivate our science. And I think that if we think about that for ecology, I think it's useful for the broader culture as well. And sort of as I last touched on in that last section, it's not, a lot of people, because they don't understand the model itself, somehow disengage with it. And we stop using our critical eye for how we want to use these data. And so a lot of the ecology in the last 10 years or I should say the last couple centuries, right, has been like, there's a cheetah, I saw a cheetah. I went to the field, I looked up and I saw a cheetah, right? And we need to move more towards, there was probably a cheetah there at this time and place with some posterior distribution. And I think Bayesian statistics is going to be hugely important here, because we're going to have to move away from the idea that every piece of data we have is 100% true. Not that it was in the first place anyways, but that we have to move away from that idea and move towards, it's probably a cheetah, and I'm going to use that knowledge to inform my science. What are the obstacles? What are the challenges that keep us from getting those places? Sloppy data management is the number one challenge. Until we get serious about how we collect and store our data, especially for sort of secondary use, you might not have a use for your data in a particular way to do machine learning, but I hope I've shown you that models can be quickly developed using transfer learning, using lots of different pieces of data, and dropping them all into a giant pool is the best way forward. And so even if you only have 10 images, having some standardized way of attacking the metadata problem is so important now, because it'll allow us to generalize better. I will also say that there's an epidemic of weak evaluation procedures. And this one's sort of on the editors, on the journals, really on everyone, to stop thinking about publication as our final end product of what we're trying to do as scientists. Because there is a rash of sort of obsession about state of the art and really big numbers with publication. You always want like a method that performs like 90-some% accuracy, right? But in truth, if anything was 90% accurate, you're probably either not evaluating it correctly or the problem wasn't hard enough, right? I want to see low evaluation scores. That convinces me as a reviewer that you are taking it seriously. If you were to believe the evaluation scores from the last 2 decades of tree detection papers, you would really, really wonder why we keep attacking something that's already 97% resolved. Every paper is 90% done, 90% recall, 90%, like what? And so in some ways, we have to find a way as reviewers and editors to stop obsessing about how well we've done, but rather how important is the problem? Did we make a substantial improvement? And so I think that there's a real push here, that sort of the lowercase science about how we do this as a scientist community. We also have challenges of unequal collaboration across disciplines and geographies, both in terms of machine learning researchers working with ecologists. Ecologists are really struggling in general to attract the machine learning interest. And one of the things I've noticed is that ecologists tend to underplay how hard their problems are. And so they always act like they're getting a favor done by machine learning researchers. And that's not the way to engage the talent. What you want to do is say, I have a crazy hard problem, so hard that you'll never succeed. That's how you get grant funding, and that's how you get people interested in it. The computer vision researchers we work with aren't interested in something that is achievable. They're interested in something that we don't know is possible. And so that, I think, is a paradigm that we need to start emphasizing in ecology, because our problems are genuinely hard. And focusing on why they are hard is going to help us attack and attract talent and keep talent from the computer vision community much better. I think everyone knows, and I think it's been sort of beat over the head with the poor reproducibility and data sharing challenges in ecology. But it really is just, if you run an algorithm and you can't make it reproducible and you can't share your data, then it basically doesn't exist, especially in methods development. And so as journals, as editors, as reviewers, I think we need to get really stringent about this idea that if we aren't able to reproduce it, or at least really understand it, then it shouldn't be published. And so if we look at what's happening in the machine learning community and open benchmarks, I think is a really important way forward, and something ecology needs to get more serious about. And then the final one is there's this role for statistical analysis and the statisticians among us to really help us propagate uncertainty in downstream analysis. Right now, what happens is that the model might predict for the trees, for example, an uncertainty between 0 and 1, and say, I have like a 30% confidence that this is a tree. But we have no idea if that 30% is like good or bad, or should be used for biomass analysis, but not for fire analysis, right? The propagation of uncertainty is really not happening right now. What we end up doing is saying, everything above 15% confidence, we're calling a tree, we're calling it truth, and we're moving forward. And I think that there's room for more nuance there, and it's gonna involve working with math departments, it's gonna be working with stats departments, with public health departments who have these expertise, to help thinking about how we attack these data in other ways. My voice is starting to go a little bit. And so to show what we're doing about that and how we hope to move forward as the Ecology Lab, we are creating a benchmark data set for tree detection. So we're releasing all the crowns, all the field data, all the neon data cleaned up as an R package. It's being prepped right now, but it's on GitHub. If anyone is interested in tree detection, please do contact me. We want to see this algorithm improve. We don't want to be the best. We want to be irrelevant 2 years from now. We want an algorithm so much better that they're like, remember Deep Forest? That thing was terrible. That's how I know that something good has happened, right? Because I want to really stress here at the end of the talk that I think there's a role for everyone. In a lot of ways, I give these talks and people are like, well, I don't have the technical knowledge, I don't write code in Python, and my point to everyone is that there really is a position and importance for every single part of ecology in making this revolution possible. It's not just like waiting around for like machine learning scientists to solve problems, because that'll never happen. We need to think about the sort of whole ecosystem and how each part of our ecosystem can make this possible. Field researchers, right? We need data collected, right? We need the data out in the field. And so there's never going to be an opportunity for machines to predict things they can't see, right? And so, for my PhD, I did a lot of work off the grid in Ecuador, and we were carrying cameras up and down on mules, right? And collecting that data was incredibly difficult and required tremendous amount of natural history knowledge about where to place cameras, for example. And so there is going to be a role here for field researchers forever. Not least of all to validate the data, because we need people who know their study systems incredibly well and who can encode that knowledge into our annotations so that that knowledge can be dispersed through the ecology community. And so there's a role here for natural history, both in terms of scientists as well as the public, because some of the best natural historians are out there in the public. There's a huge role for museums here in codifying data, in working on metadata and working on secondary use and making it explorable, both in terms of the images as well as the annotations. I think there's a real sort of push there. There's a role for the public to contribute data, because I hope I've shown you today that even low quality data can be super useful. So even if you have, eBird data where the public has identified images, right? And we have millions of those photos, even if a lot of them are wrong, which by the way, a lot of birders out there are better than we are, but even if a lot of them are wrong, we can still learn from those weak labels. And so the public has a huge role to play here in helping us move forward. I've talked a lot here about the statistics here, but I think moving towards a better relationship with the statistical community in machine learning is really valuable. And then at the end of all of that, after you have the data collected, the natural history, the metadata structure, the right kind of experimental framework through the statistics, then the data scientists come in to actually design your model. But in no way is it sort of driven by the data scientists. It's part of the ecology community. We're sort of the last step. And so I hope that that's a way of convincing people that there's something here for everybody. And with that, I want to thank everyone. And if you're interested in working with us on these tools, my collaborators and I are hiring a postdoc in Switzerland. Catherine Graham in Switzerland is looking for a postdoc on computer vision. We're going to be redesigning Deep Meerkat, hopefully for the cloud, and trying to make it available to everyone. Thank you.
Ben, thanks a ton. We don't, clapping is in order here. That was an amazing job, and amazing on a bunch of different fronts. Your voice held together, and that was just a really beautiful exploration of the power of using deep learning in ecology. I think that was, couldn't have imagined a better presentation to sort of look at this really exciting area in ecology and computer science. Dave, I'll turn it over to you here in a second for helping us lead the question session. Hopefully people can stick around for a bit. Ben, I know you've been talking for a while. We're going to let you off the hook around 4 or 4:05 here Eastern time in about 5 or 10 minutes. But I definitely want to.
I got time.
I would definitely want to make sure we have time for questions, because this is such a fertile topic right now and super exciting. I'm going to hold on my question to let other people dive in here. I have a couple, but I really want to hear from the crowd. So
we already have quite a lot of questions, which is great. So
great.
So I'm going to go in the order I've seen them. So
okay.
So Matt Gitzendiner wrote, I think you mentioned this as a future direction, but wondering about adding the LiDAR data to the tree detection process. It seems like a loss to throw that out after the weak label data.
Totally. And we'll be working on multi-sensor data moving forward. The hard part of the neon data, though, is it's only like 4 points per meter. And so the LiDAR data you've seen from like self-driving cars is hundreds of points per meter or 50 points per meter. And so we're struggling a little bit with the neon data quality. And so like a tree is sort of made up of like 20 or 30 points. But we know that height itself is going to be interesting. And we'll be working on that probably around December.
Cool. I'm going to turn on Michelle's audio so she can ask her question. You got it, Michelle?
I can't see.
Can you hear me now?
Hi,
Yeah.
Michelle.
Go ahead.
Hi, Ben. My name is Michelle. I'm an archaeologist at the museum, and I really enjoyed your talk. First of all, thanks. It was really great to hear such an ecology-based talk. So a lot of my interests are in human-environment interactions through time, right? And I was thinking about, what are your thoughts on kind of integrating, predictive modeling based on AI capabilities to recognize different ecological changes through time, say in coastal environments, that may be signatures for potential long-term human impacts impacting the different kinds of plants or vegetation that we see, and then layering that on, to potential vulnerability to different ecologies or ecological areas through time, and also possible cultural resources or sites associated with those. I guess I'm talking about, I'm kind of flustered. Sorry, I've got kids running around. I'm trying to be really fast.
No, totally.
I'm thinking if there's ways to integrate how we see or view archaeological sites on a more mass scale, which people are doing this, by the way, that itself isn't novel, but pairing that up with ecological changes through time. I mean, do you see room to work in that kind of capacity in terms of this deep
totally. And I think the remote sensing data has gotten better every year. Part of this in some ways is that we are like developing fertile ground in terms of model development and like getting the community ready for the metadata and all of that stuff. And that we hope technology, especially the sensing data, is going to improve sort of in step with it, right? Right now, it's very expensive to buy remote sensing data at the scales you really need to answer those questions. But we hope in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, that we're sort of be more prepared as those data become available. Because we know those data are available to some audiences. For example, in the Antarctic, the US military releases their like 2 centimeter data.
Yeah.
So we know it's out there. And so, right, in some ways we're prepping with the drone data we can collect in hopes that as we move forward, that's the sort of promise. And we've learned from astronomy, right? Like Hubble was looking at this tiny telescope. And over time, we get better with these things. And so I think that we get prepped with our models, and then the data kind of comes to us to answer the kind of questions you're interested in.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Ben. So there's a question here, and I hope, David, I get it right for you. So David Boyd asks, do you worry that the predictive language for which you're advocating, there was, quote, probably a cheetah in a tree, threatens to alienate the non-scientific community at a time when mistrust in science seems to be on the rise? Do you think anything can be done about?
It's always important, right? Like it's about what we do internally, right, to like make it rigorous, but we also have to way of describing it so that audiences will understand. I don't know that, we want to present to the fish and wildlife community, for example, like there was like maybe a salmon in this river, right? That's probably not going to be the right way of communicating to that audience. But when we make predictions, we want to think about the uncertainty associated with those predictions, even if the uncertainty is large, because it allows us to sort of move forward as a community and identify those areas of weakness. So there's a great paper by Heather Lynch and her grad student Katie, who looked at penguin colonies in the Antarctic using sort of remote sensing, right? And they made this incredibly beautiful model, but it shows that the king penguin populations, like between 500,000 and like 2.1 million, right? So this wild range. And I think that paper actually should be really held up as a great example, because now we can say, where is it that's contributing to that uncertainty, and start attacking those areas of uncertainty, instead of saying like it's probably somewhere around 1 million penguins, because we'll sort of never get better. by focusing on just 1 million, we'll never know where those uncertainties are. And next field research season, you don't know which part of it is that you need to collect. In that case, they need to understand how many penguins are moving between colonies. That's their big problem. And so I think that's a little bit of helping us move forward. But you're right, communicating these things will always be difficult to the public, who are not going to be excited about there was probably a salmon.
Nice, thank you. So we got one more. Sarah, I turned on your mic, so I think you can unmute yourself if you want to ask your question. Are you there? Here, I'll unmute you. Sarah Cabrera, do you want to ask your question?
I think you might have the wrong Sarah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Your hand was raised. That's why I called on you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem.
Well, hi, Sarah.
Sorry, didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Sarah didn't want to talk to me.
So, Rob, do you want to ask your question here? Maybe?
Yeah, but that really was fantastic. And my questions, I've kind of got two, one really broad and one a little more narrow. The broad question really is about the linkages and some of the opportunities around deep learning approaches for forecasting and decision support, and how you see that playing out over the next 5 years. I mean, I totally resonate with your point about reporting uncertainty and learning how to basically drive systems that are self-improving in terms of better lowering uncertainties through time as you assimilate more and more data, and kind of building this systems that can assimilate data more quickly. I'm really excited about that. I think there's a lot of components there that blend everything you've talked about. But I'm interested beyond computer vision, what you see is like the trajectory for, say, just the next couple of years on deep learning explicitly, maybe in decision support. Do you see how that's going to work and how that kind of fits? And there's more complexity there than simply annotating trees and which is really hard, which is super hard.
No, and what you said is even harder, right? Because it incorporates people's behavior, right? And I think one of the things that is useful here is also it's a conduit to other communities who are interested in these same kind of problems, right? The deep learning space, right, driven by self-driving cars and all these pieces, is allowing us to all sort of gain common jargon. And so I think the answer to your question is that by having a common set of tools, we form a bridge to communities who are interested in these kinds of questions. And so we now have areas of collaboration in public health, in environmental science, in archaeology, right? And I think that one of the things that we start to see is that, you know, by virtue of computer vision itself, we are all interested in labeling images with stuff, whether it's Nike telling me it's 1 pair of pants versus 2, right? Like those are the same challenges that we have. And so I go to conferences on data science and no one cares about trees, but they care about semi-supervised learning. And so I hope that one of the ways that we can form a sort of nucleus that will help answer these kind of questions is through sort of joint exploration of these common problems. The other answer, I think, to your question is that when we start to address prediction as the fundamental goal in ecology, and we start to get comfortable with the fact of how terrible we are, and it's so hard, right? Right? Like, how many hummingbirds should be in this forest? It's a crazy hard question. And so it starts to open up our confidence as a field to say, these are the kind of things which are ecology. And that's something we want to study. Because right now, if you were to predict something and you were 5% accurate, it's very hard to get into ecology letters right now, right? Doing that, right?
That was great. Ben, I think maybe we should, for your own benefit,
I'm always happy to answer questions.
Oh, all right. Well, I can let you keep going if you want, but
I mean, people can leave, but I'm here until my voice gives out. You know.
I guess are there other remaining questions? Oh, I see Gabe has his hand up. Okay, Gabe, go for it.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, Gabe, what's up?
Awesome. Well, that was a fantastic talk. I mean, I learned a whole new perspective on this that I'd never had before. But I'm curious. So with this this machine learning, it seems like we take the perspective of trying to educate the AI in the way we would educate, another researcher with our own knowledge of a certain ecosystem or taxon. But is there any precedent for teaching an AI to think kind of like one of our study organisms, to maybe navigate the environment like a lizard or a fish or a butterfly?
Oh, so now you're getting, now it's fun. Okay, so there's a researcher named Jeff Clune who is at OpenAI or Uber Labs. And they do a lot of like self-teaching simulations, basically like, can a robot figure it's not a real robot, it's like a figurative figure using machine learning, get through mazes and stuff and teach itself over time, right? And so there's a lot of this idea that like, if you were to play like Tetris, you would get really good by learning how you failed at Tetris. And so sort of hitting all the walls. And so one of the things that I think is exciting from the behavioral ecology standpoint is if you could train a model to start learning to fail in the same kind of way that an organism does. So imagine a biologger. I used to work on whales that have GPS signals, right? Imagine training a model to move in an ecosystem the way whales do and trying to figure out what are the environmental correlates or predictors that make whales dive at a certain depth, for example. And so I think there is a lot of connection here between the machine learning and the biologging community. And in fact, there's a paper on deep learning for animal telemetry in Methods in Ecology Evolution by a woman from Iowa State whose name escapes me, but she's in the math department at Iowa State.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
What is your photo here? And what can I ask you what that is?
Yes, absolutely. That is a green spotted puffer, Dichotomictera nigroviridis, just a little juvenile curled up in someone's palm.
Adorable.
It's truly
I thought
is.
so.
Hey guys, I do want to respect other people's time commitments here regarding the hour. Ben's been so gracious. I really want to just say again, Ben, thank you so much for making the time to do this under duress. That was fantastic. We really appreciate the expertise and effort. We should let you get back to your day. We'll thank everybody again for coming out for this one. We had a ton of people here to listen in, and we'll hopefully I'll see you all next week at the seminar coming up next week. Thanks, and that's going to be Dave Blackburn seminar, so definitely worth attending for that one. So
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks again, Ben. It was great. Bye, everyone. Happy Friday.